Welcome to this presentation about the history of women in the monastic Sangha in the Theravada tradition. My name is Mindy Zlotnick, and I was inspired to put this presentation together when I saw one that had been created by the Alliance for Bhikkhunis in 2011. I'd been meditating at that point for over 25 years, and I'd never heard this history of women in the monastic Sangha. I was inspired to see what I could come up with to make this information more available. The presentation comes from a place of deep respect for the monastic Sangha, who have dedicated their lives to keeping the Dhamma alive. But as the Buddha reminds us with his vision of the Four-fold Sangha, it also takes dedicated lay women and men to keep the Dhamma alive as well. More will be said about this vision in a bit. The presentation is an overview of how Bhikkhunis, or fully ordained nuns, in the Theravada tradition came into being, disappeared, and are now reappearing again in modern times. In the West, many of us have been introduced to the Dhamma through the efforts of many wonderful lay teachers, and the monastic Sangha has not been the transmitter as much as in Asia. So the experience for many in the West is a kind of disconnect from the monastic Sangha. I'm hoping this presentation will spark an interest in the history of the monastics, in particular the Bhikkhuni Sangha, and the original vision that the Buddha had for a fourfold Sangha of female and male monastics and female and male lay practitioners. We know that the Bhikkhuni lineage arose during the time of the Buddha, was in existence for about 1,500 years, and then disappeared for as long as 1,000 years in some places. About 30 years ago, we began to see the reappearance of Bhikkhunis, and what we see now in the 21st century is the beginning of a growing and thriving lineage throughout the world. The story of the Bhikkhuni order begins with Mahapajapati, the Buddha's stepmother and aunt. There's a wonderfully dramatic story in the Pali Canon about Mahapajapati and her 500 followers asking the Buddha for ordination 3 times and being refused each time. But there are inconsistencies and contradictions in this story. In recent times, Analio Bhikkhu has done some extraordinary research with other contemporary texts and has come up with another version of the story that makes more sense. Mahapajapati requests permission for women to go forth, which the Buddha refuses because conditions are not yet suitable for such a move, as living the holy life in celibacy might not last long if they were to become homeless wanderers. He was mainly concerned for their safety, for fear of rape was really high. Therefore, he tells her that they should better live a celibate life in a more protected environment at home, cut off their hair, put on robes, but stay at home. Mahapajapati and a group of followers follow this suggestion and shave off their hair and put on robes. After the Buddha has left for a long trip, they decide to follow him, proving their willingness to brave the conditions of homeless life. On witnessing their keenness and ability to face the difficulties of homeless life, the Buddha gives them permission to join the order. The Bhikkhuni order was established by the Buddha around 5 years after the Bhikkhu order was established in the 6th century BC. Whichever story we follow, we do know that Mahapajapati was one of the first strong Bhikkhuni leaders in the Buddhist Sangha. We also know that she brought many women into the Sangha with her. By inviting women into his Sangha, the Buddha established what was to become a controversial stance on the position of women in spiritual life. At first, Bhikkhunis received upasampada, or ordination, from the Buddha, and then from the Bhikkhu Sangha only. Ordination by the Bhikkhu Sangha continued on for some time, until there was a case of a candidate who was shy and could not answer the series of questions which are asked of the candidate at the beginning of the ceremony. These questions are very private and caused her embarrassment when having to be answered to a male bhikkhu. The ordination couldn't be completed and the case was reported to the Buddha. It was with this incident that the Buddha suggested that the Bhikkhuni Sangha come in and ask the questions and become part of the ordination process according to the Pali text. The Bhikkhuni Sangha alone gives the ordination, and the bhikkhus confirm and complete the process. This was the beginning of what is called dual ordination as opposed to single bhikkhu ordination, an important differentiation that the texts tell us happened in the time of the Buddha. And we'll be hearing more about dual ordination as opposed to single ordination later in the presentation. This quote is taken from the Mahaparinirvana Sutta, where the Buddha talks about his vision of the Four-fold Sangha. He spoke of this soon after his enlightenment, when Mara came and asked him to pass away. And the Buddha said that he would not pass away until he had a well-established Sangha that consisted of bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, laymen, and laywomen. There are many examples of artwork which represent images of bhikkhunis, and this particular mural of the Four-fold Sangha is from Wat Po in Bangkok, made in the 18th century. The bhikkhunis are to the right of the Buddha, and the female lay practitioners are below them. The bhikkhus are to the left of the Buddha, and the male lay practitioners are below them. It's kind of ironic that this image of the Four-fold Sangha would be in a mural in Bangkok, Thailand, where in the present day there is a lot of pushback to the full ordination of women in general. This mural of the 13 Arahant Bhikkhunis is also from Wat Po in Bangkok, Thailand. The Buddha extolled the attainments of many enlightened bhikkhunis in his assembly. As the Buddha had 2 chief male disciples, he likewise had 2 foremost female disciples, named Kema and Upalawana. The presence and accomplishment of the bhikkhunis made his sasana established and his purpose in teaching complete. There's a beautiful chant about the 13 Arahant Bhikkhunis that we'll hear later in the video that's part of this presentation. The Four-fold Sangha has been established, the Buddha dies, and now we're going to jump ahead 300 years. Take a moment to think about 300 years ago, 1716, and how different society was and how many changes there have been since then. And then think about how different our society will be in 300 years. It's a long, long time with many, many generations. And the Bhikkhuni Sangha was well established at this point. We jump ahead 300 years to the rule of King Ashoka, who ruled 35 years and converted to Buddhism in 263 BC. He regarded Buddhism as a doctrine that could serve as a cultural foundation for political unity. In his edicts engraved on the pillars depicted here on this slide, Ashoka vows to care for his people like a father. He promises neighboring people that they need not fear him. He would only use persuasion, not violence, to win people over. He was one of India's greatest emperors and reigned over an area that stretched from Afghanistan to the modern state of Bangladesh and covered the entire Indian subcontinent, except for parts of present Tamil Nadu and Kerala. King Ashoka sent Buddhist missionaries in 9 different directions. Ayattataloka, a Bhikkhuni historian in California, talks about a contingent that was sent to the land of gold in her articles called Glimmers of a Thai Bhikkhuni Sangha History. The land of gold included Thailand, Laos, Burma, southern China, and Cambodia, and may have even included parts of Indonesia. This contingent ordained 3,500 men and 1,500 women. Ayattataloka feels that the Bhikkhunis were ordained only by bhikkhus in single ordination, since no bhikkhunis were mentioned in the texts. Ashoka sent his own son, Mahindatara, to Sri Lanka down south to teach the Dhamma and establish the Bhikkhu Sangha. The princess there, the sister-in-law of the king of Sri Lanka, converted to Buddhism and wanted to join the Sangha. Mahindatara said to her, "It is not for us to do." He said that the Bhikkhunis that Bhikkhunis were needed to do the ordination. He suggested that she ask the king of Sri Lanka to ask King Ashoka, his father, in India, to send his daughter, Sanghamita Thera, and some other Bhikkhunis to give the ordination. Tradition held in the Vinaya shows that ordination evolved over time, with bhikkhus sometimes giving it, sometimes Bhikkhunis, and sometimes both together, with dual ordination being the final method established. And that's exactly what King Ashoka did. He sent his daughter, Sanghamita Thera, and other Bhikkhunis to establish the nuns' order in Sri Lanka. This is a picture from the Kailaniya temple in Colombo, Sri Lanka, depicting Bhikkhuni Sanghamita arriving in Sri Lanka by boat. It was painted mid-20th century, about 1927 to 46. Sanghamita arrived in Sri Lanka on the full moon day in the month of December, which is celebrated to this day as Sanghamita Day by Theravada Buddhists in Sri Lanka and other parts of the world. King Ashoka also sent a sapling of the Bodhi tree from Bodh Gaya with her. There were no Buddha statues at that point in history. They came way later with the Greeks and the Romans. And the Bodhi tree represented a site of great awakening, and thus the Buddha and his teachings at that point. Sanghamita and other Indian Bhikkhunis ordained the princess and hundreds of other Sri Lankan women, establishing a strong Bhikkhuni Sangha in Sri Lanka for the first time. The Bhikkhuni Sangha prospered alongside the Bhikkhu Sangha for over 1,200 years, until both orders were wiped out when the Chola king from southern India attacked Sri Lanka in 1017 CE. But before we jump those 1,200 years, we'll jump about 700 years to the year 429 CE and take a little trip to China along with some Bhikkhunis from Sri Lanka. So again, imagine 700 years ago, 1316, and how different society and culture was, or 700 years into the future. Who knows what that's going to look like? In any case, it's a long, long time, and many generations have passed, and the Bhikkhuni Sangha is well established in Sri Lanka. There is a primary document that verifies that in 429 CE, there was a group of Sri Lankan Bhikkhunis in China who had traveled from Sri Lanka to China by boat. We know that there was also a group of nuns in China around this time who had already been ordained by the Bhikkhu Sangha alone in single ordination. These Chinese nuns wanted to be reordained with a dual ordination so that it was in line with what they saw was the Buddhist vision. They asked the visiting Sri Lankan Bhikkhunis if some of them would be willing to go back to Sri Lanka to gather more Bhikkhunis so they would have enough for an ordination. Some of the original Bhikkhunis stayed on in China to study Chinese, and some went back to Sri Lanka to gather the requisite number of Bhikkhunis to make a quorum for the ordination. The second group arrived back in China in 433 CE. It took 4 years for the group of Bhikkhunis from China to travel to Sri Lanka, gather the needed Bhikkhunis, and come back to China in 433 CE, 4 years later. When they arrived, they co-convened a dual ordination platform together with the bhikkhus, giving higher ordination to more than 300 women in the Na Lin Southern Forest Monastery in Nanking. Huge amount of dedication to leave China and go to Sri Lanka. Huge amount of courage and dedication to leave Sri Lanka again to come back to China in order to give full ordination to the Chinese women who were wanting higher ordination through dual ordination in China. Here's a map of the area and the likely route that they might have taken. It took 2 years for them to get to Sri Lanka, collect the women they needed, and 2 years for them to get back to Nanking. Just to give perspective, here is Nanking in the 1920s and Nanking in the present. Lots and lots of changes. Early in the 20th century, there were many huge monasteries in mainland China. Before the communist takeover, the monks in China thought they were strong and would be able to survive. The nuns, though, thought that if China was going to be taken over by the communists, it was time for them to migrate to Taiwan. They brought all their resources with them, began to build nunneries, and became very well settled in Taiwan. This is a picture of the contemporary Na Lin Southern Forest Monastery in Taiwan, which is the namesake of the original monastery where the first Chinese Bhikkhunis were ordained through dual ordination. When the communists did take over the mainland, the monks realized that this was not going to work, so they fled to Taiwan in a hurry and arrived with almost nothing. The nun Sangha gave them considerable help as they became re-established. The monks remember their kindness, and the nuns of Taiwan are very well respected by both the monks and the lay Buddhists. The nuns far outnumber the monks, are well educated, and have strong communities with their own leaders. The numbers in 2014 show that there were as many as 6 times as many Bhikkhunis as bhikkhus in Taiwan. There are now thousands of Chinese, Taiwanese, Korean, and Vietnamese Bhikkhunis. It's important to remember that this is a continuous lineage from 433 CE until the present day. Now let's go back to Sri Lanka and continue with the Theravada lineage there. Remember Sanghamita? She established the Bhikkhuni Sangha in Sri Lanka in about 265 BC or so. Then we went off on a tangent, and we're now coming back to the timeline. In 433 CE, the Bhikkhuni lineage was established in China through dual ordination after the Bhikkhuni order had been established in Sri Lanka for 700 years. And now we're going to jump another 600 years after that. Remember, the monastic Sangha, Bhikkhus and Bhikkhunis, had been established for almost 1,200 years at this point in Sri Lanka, many generations. It had been established for 1,500 years in the world from the time of the Buddha. In 1017, Cholian tribes came down from India and conquered the island of Sri Lanka, and the Bhikkhu and Bhikkhuni order disappeared and became defunct. After 50 years of Cholian rule, though, a new king arose, a Buddhist king, and expelled the invaders. During this period, the local Buddhism became more and more under Tamil and Hindu influence. Anti-feminism and the caste system were features that were entrenched in the laws of Hinduism. So when this new Buddhist king wanted to revive the monastic Sangha, he had to get bhikkhus from Thailand and Burma. But there were no Bhikkhunis of the same order in Burma and Siam, according to the people who came back. And so they maintained that the Bhikkhuni order should be considered defunct and not restorable. This information comes from a newspaper article from the Island newspaper in Colombo, Sri Lanka, written in 1998. In it, the author points out that there is evidence that only bhikkhus could have ordained bhikkhunis at that point if they were willing. But since their wishes were otherwise, and I quote, they were more interested in maintaining their monopolies, it suited them to take the caste and anti-feminist line, end quote. We know the Buddha had overridden the caste system and opened the door for women. And now we are looking at a point in history just 50 years after the disappearance of the Bhikkhu and Bhikkhuni order. It shows us how fragile this kind of cultural change is and how easily it can be influenced by surrounding culture and conditioning. Ayatollah, the local California historian and Bhikkhuni, points to records of Bhikkhunis at that time in northern Burma, but because they were of a different order, it was chosen not to bring their tradition back to Sri Lanka, and it was basically a political decision not to reinstate the Bhikkhuni Sangha ordination lineage at that time. This timeline shows the establishment of the Bhikkhuni ordination during the first 1,500 years of its existence. Established by the Buddha around 550 BC, established in Sri Lanka through Bhikkhuni ordination around 265 BC, established in China through dual ordination in around 433 CE. The Bhikkhu and Bhikkhuni orders were wiped out in Sri Lanka in 1017 CE, and the Bhikkhuni order was never reestablished in Sri Lanka until modern times. Ayatata Loka, in her article Glimmers of a Thai Bhikkhuni Sangha History, finds evidence of Bhikkhunis scattered throughout Southeast Asia during these centuries, leaving a gap of less than 200 years between the last Bhikkhuni records and the beginnings of the contemporary revival. These are scatterings, though, and no real vibrant nuns community existed, as it had in Sri Lanka before its demise. Since most literature is focused on the demise of the Bhikkhuni Sangha in Sri Lanka, this presentation will focus on the revival in Sri Lanka. It's important to remember, though, that the East Asian lineage continued all through the years where the Sri Lankan lineage was non-existent. This is important to remember when we come to the re-establishment of the Bhikkhuni lineage in Sri Lanka. Women continued to practice, though, and women's monasticism took different forms. There's really not much information until we see evidence of the emergence of Meiji in Thailand during the Ayutthaya period, which began in the 14th century CE. Today in Thailand, Meiji still exist in Thailand. Most are 8 precept nuns, though some do take 10 precepts. Many of them are poorly educated and basically serve as maids to the monks. In 1928, bhikkhus were officially banned from giving full bhikkhuni ordination to any woman, a long story that we won't go into here. I've been told, though, that the secular legal ban was lifted in 2006, but I found evidence that there's still problems in ordaining bhikkhunis in Thailand. The nuns in Myanmar, or Burma, are called Tila Shin. They are 10 precept nuns and are in a slightly better position than the Meiji in Thailand, but are still relegated to a lower status than that of the monks, but not subservient to them. They are able to receive training, practice meditation, and sit for the same qualification examinations as the monks. The form of 10 precept nuns spread from Myanmar to Sri Lanka in the early 20th century in the form of Dasa Silmata, or DSM for short. Many Buddhist leaders in Sri Lanka, among the clergy and laity, realized clearly that this DSM status for nuns was really incongruous and incompatible with the Buddhist concept of the Four-fold Sangha among his disciples and devotees. It was this clarity that planted the seeds for change and started to create the revival of the Bhikkhuni Sangha in Sri Lanka. In England, the Siladhara order is the closest to the Bhikkhuni ordination and is only done in England at Chithurst and Amaravati monasteries in the Achancha lineage since 1983. The order was originally created in response to a request by 4 women to have ordination equal to the bhikkhus. Achan Sumedho went to Thailand and got permission to give Siladhara ordination in England. They are well-trained 10 precept nuns. They live in community, but are not fully ordained in line with the vision of the Buddha, nor do they have equal opportunities that the bhikkhus have in their respective monasteries. The Siladhara order is an important piece of this story, since the Aloka Vihara nuns, who we'll be talking about in a bit, were originally invited to the United States to start a monastery for Siladhara. Now we are in the gap years in Sri Lanka with no fully ordained bhikkhunis for almost 1,000 years. The revival of the Theravada Bhikkhuni Sangha doesn't begin until the late 20th century. It's important to remember that the ordination lineages are not innately Mahayana or Theravada. They all stem from early Buddhist Vinaya traditions. In China, we're not talking about a Mahayana ordination lineage. The Mahayana schools, whether in Tibet, China, Korea, or Vietnam, mostly follow the Dharma-guptaka Vinaya. Dharma-guptaka is one of the Theravada six. There is evidence that there were attempts to re-establish the Bhikkhuni order in Burma in the 1930s, 1950s, and 1970s, but to no avail. In 1934, the World Federation of Buddhists in Sri Lanka advocated for the restoration of the Bhikkhuni order, again to no avail. In 1952, Bhikkhu Pandit Narawala Dhammaratana Thero from Sri Lanka, a very well-respected bhikkhu, advocated for the revival of the Bhikkhuni order with the assistance from Chinese nuns, but to no avail. He actually went to China to study the Bhikkhuni order and found that it had been established on firm Vinaya footing by the Sri Lankan nuns in 433. Then, in 1984, Dr. Hema Gunatalake from the Sakyadhita organization did a lecture tour in China and talked with the international group of Fo Guanshan, who had temples all over the world to support the Chinese diaspora. Basically, her message to this group was, the Bhikkhuni ordination was given by Sri Lankan women in 433, and now it's time to give it back to us. With the help of Fo Guanshan and the Taiwanese bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, the order began to revive. It took Fo Guanshan about 4 years to sponsor the first Bhikkhuni ordination in 1988. A group of 20 women ordained at the Shi Lai Monastery in Hacienda Heights in Southern California, one of the international temples of Fo Guanshan. That group included 5 Sri Lankan 10-precept nuns, or Dasa Silmata. It also included 5 10-precept nuns from Nepal, including Guru Ma Damawati and 10 other international women from other countries, including Ayakema, who became quite famous and quite influential in the Bhikkhuni world. They were ordained through the Pali Rite text first by the Sri Lankan Bhikkhu Sangha, and then with Taiwanese bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. It's important to note that this ordination was co-organized and supported by one of the most venerable Sri Lankan elder bhikkhunis, Venerable Havanpola Ratanasara Nayakatero, who served as preceptor. The 1988 Bhikkhuni ordination, though, was quietly ignored and really didn't result in any shift in Sri Lanka with regards to the Bhikkhuni movement. Many of the women returned to Sri Lanka and did not have the support needed to continue as bhikkhunis. There was still a lot to learn in regards to what kind of support and education was needed in order for the Bhikkhuni lineage to revive. Interestingly enough, Guru Ma Damawati, who was from the Sakyan clan, the same as the Buddhist family, returned to Nepal, the birthplace of the Buddha, and continued to grow a thriving community there, and at this point has over 30 centers throughout Nepal. A second wave of ordinations occurred in 1996. Sakyadhita, the organization of Buddhist women, along with the Korean Bhikkhuni Sangha, sponsored the first international higher ordination in Sarnath, India. At this ceremony, 10 carefully selected DSM nuns were fully ordained as bhikkhunis by a sangha of South Korean bhikkhus via the Dharma-guptaka rite, followed by the Pali text rite ordination by a sangha of Sri Lankan bhikkhus from the Mahabodhi Society. For the first time in almost 1,000 years, the Bhikkhuni order was reinstated in India. The ceremony was criticized, though, because it was not a dual ordination. It was planned and intended to be a dual ordination, but that's not what happened. The nuns from Sri Lanka and the Korean Bhikkhuni Sangha researched, planned, and prepared together for almost 5 years beforehand. But in the end, the ceremony was administered by the Bhikkhu Sanghas alone. The next year, in 1997, an international full ordination happened at the International Buddhist Meditation Center in Los Angeles. Theravada women from Sri Lanka, Nepal, and the United States were fully ordained as Bhikkhunis. Aloka was one of the women who was fully ordained here. Aloka, the historian I mentioned in the first part of this presentation, is someone we're going to see play an important role in the growth of the Bhikkhuni Sangha worldwide, especially in America. Venerable Dr. Karunadharma was one of the organizers, and Venerable Dr. Havanpola Ratanasara served as preceptor. This was also planned as a dual ordination, but that's not what happened. One of the Bhikkhunis caught the flu, and there were only 4 Bhikkhunis present, so not enough for a quorum. Even though they had been involved with giving the training in the month beforehand, in the end the ordination itself was performed by the Pali text rite, by the Sri Lankan Bhikkhu Sangha alone, led by Venerable Dr. Havanpola Ratanasara as preceptor and Venerable Wapola Piyananda as vice preceptor. A year after that, in 1998, there was an international full ordination sponsored by the Chinese group Foguan Shan in Bodh Gaya, India. They were aware of the criticism of the 1996 ordination, so they made this one a dual ordination. It took place with the full support of Dr. Havanpola Ratanasara, again, and Venerable Piyananda. The candidates were allowed to dress in the robes of their tradition, which had been a criticism in the past. First, the candidates received the dual ordination via the Dharmagupta rite from both the Bhikkhuni and the Bhikkhu Sanghas. Then, directly afterwards, the new Bhikkhunis who wished to continue in the Theravada tradition received the single ordination administered by the Theravada Bhikkhu Sangha alone via the Pali text rite, in order to change and validate their tradition. The women ordained in the 1998 ordination returned to Sri Lanka and became preceptors for the next generation of Bhikkhunis. They had more acceptance in Sri Lanka this time, and the order began to grow. Today, almost 20 years later, there are over 1,000 Bhikkhunis in Sri Lanka. Between 1998 and 2003, there were many ordinations in Sri Lanka that we don't have time to go into in this presentation. In 2003, there was an interesting ordination, though, the first modern international Bhikkhuni ordination to take place on Sri Lankan soil. In addition to many Sri Lankan women, there were 3 women from different countries who later became leaders of the Bhikkhuni Sangha worldwide. Aya Sudama has the distinction of being the first American woman to be fully ordained in Sri Lanka. Aya Gunasari was the first Burmese woman, and Venerable Dhammananda was the first from Thailand to be fully ordained as a Theravada Bhikkhuni in modern times. In 2015, they have 12 vasas and are now eligible to become preceptors for other women who wish to ordain in the Bhikkhuni lineage. This picture was taken at the first International Congress on Buddhist Women that took place in Hamburg in 2007, where leading Buddhist monastics met to discuss the history and legitimacy of the ordination of women. The Dalai Lama called the conference and attended some of the sessions. No great or immediate changes came out of the conference, though the entire issue of women's ordination continues to grow, change, and ripple through the worldwide Buddhist Sangha. Ayatollah and Ayananda Bodhi, 2 participants in the conference, remember that the concept of the Four-fold Sangha, the Buddha's original vision that we're talking about in this presentation, was brought to consciousness during this conference. Women from all over the world continue to get ordained in Sri Lanka. This picture reflects the international flavor of some of the leaders who began to create their own sanghas in their own country. From left to right, represented is Burma, America, Britain, America again, and Thailand. In 2008, the ordination of the first female novice into the Theravada Bhikkhuni Sangha took place at Dharma Creek on summer solstice on the land that was to become host to Dharmadharini's Awakening Forest Hermitage, Aranya Bodhi. This is the first time a Bhikkhuni teacher gave the seminari Papaja in North America. From 1988 up till this time, the first 20 years of the Bhikkhuni revival, the Papaja and novice precepts had always been given by groundbreaking bhikkhus. This was the first time that a Bhikkhuni attained the seniority as a teacher called for by the Vinaya, 10 years, and accepted her own students, an important milestone for the Bhikkhuni Sangha. Here, Anagarika Suvijana from the United States, a Californian and Native American, accepts the ordination vows of novice with her Upajaya Ayatataloka, the abbess of Dharmadharini Vihara, presiding. In 2009, Ayatataloka has 12 vassals and can begin to ordain other bhikkhunis. She is invited to Australia and becomes the preceptor to 4 seminaries who were ordained as bhikkhunis in the Bodhiana Monastery in Serpentine, Australia. Since Ajahn Brahm and his monastery were in the Ajahn Chah lineage, which does not allow full ordination for women, Ajahn Brahm was ordered to Thailand to explain his actions and the ordination of these women. He was asked 3 times to recant and declare the ceremony was invalid and that these women were not bhikkhunis. He refused 3 times, and he and his monastery were delisted from that lineage. This caused a huge international uproar, but in the end, nothing changed. Ajahn Brahm returned to Australia, and he and his monastery are doing fine. Ajahn Brahm continues to support bhikkhunis internationally through his speech and actions. With Ayatataloka being able to ordain in the United States, the Bhikkhuni Sangha has begun to grow in North America. On August 29, 2010, 4 seminaries became bhikkhunis during an historic dual Sangha ordination at Aranya Bodhi Hermitage in Sonoma County, California, with Ayatataloka serving as preceptor. 2 from the United States, 1 from New Zealand, and 1 for Germany were ordained as bhikkhunis in the Theravada Buddhist tradition. This was a big event for me personally. I brought the Aloka Vihara nuns to the ordination, and it was the first time that I really saw the position of Siladhara in relation to the monastic Sangha. The Aloka Vihara nuns were still Siladhara at this point. Despite the fact that they had been in robes for 20 years, they were not allowed inside the sima, or the dedicated space for the ordination, and they had to go to the back of the line for the meal. I found out later that the 2 Siladhara nuns also began to question their role as Siladhara and bringing the ordination to the next generation of women. As the sisters relate in the video that follows, they realized that the Siladhara form was not what they wanted to give the next generation of women they were going to train. Just as Sanghamita left her home in India to go to Sri Lanka to ordain women, and the Bhikkhunis left Sri Lanka to ordain women in China, the Aloka Vihara nuns left their monastery of almost 20 years to take the leap and become fully ordained bhikkhunis so that this training and ordination could be offered in the West in modern times. 2 of the nuns, Ayas Anandabodhi and Santrachita, had been part of the Ajahn Chah lineage in England for almost 20 years as Siladhara. When they decided to become bhikkhunis, they had to leave that community because it does not allow full ordination for women, and became seminaries. They took a leap because their steward organization, Saranaloka Foundation, was not set up at that point to support bhikkhunis, only Siladhara. It took a couple of months before the board decided to enlarge and expand their bylaws so that they could support both the Siladhara and the bhikkhunis of Aloka Vihara. The third seminary, Ayanemila from Canada, had studied with Ayamedanandi at the Sati Saraniya Hermitage in Canada. Ayamedanandi had been part of the Achan Cha lineage as well before she left eventually to become a Bhikkhuni in Taiwan in 2007 after being a 10-precept nun for 20 years. This ordination ceremony, which took place on October 17, 2011 at the Spirit Rock Meditation Center in Woodacre, California, had the support of venerable monastics from all major branches of Buddhism, including Bhikkhu Bodhi and Venerable Analio. Now I'd like the Bhikkhunis to speak for themselves in this video that was created for the Sakyadhita conference a number of years ago called A New Beginning.
I met my first teacher in 1988. This was a path leading to where I wanted to go. I lived in Amaravati and Chithurst monasteries in England for about 17 years, and I will always be very grateful for the excellent training and support we received there.
I've had an interest for many years to see a monastery for women, for nuns, having lived in mixed monasteries in England and knowing that there are many that are set up just for monks and very, very few that are set up just for nuns.
In England, the women were always, by default in a secondary position. It was not possible to take full ordination as Bhikkhunis. There's a certain element of hopelessness in that, and a certain element of resignation, really. And I just didn't want to train myself in those qualities because I had been, ordaining as a nun in order to free myself.
The seeds of Aloka really began with the first retreat that several of us attended, where there were both monks and nuns, and one of the senior nuns was at the end of the food line. So that image really struck home for us, and we recognized that we didn't want things to be like that. That began the discussion, which led to us forming Aloka to support the nuns in England coming over here to teach and to eventually live and hopefully now to start a monastery.
It was during a solitary meditation retreat that it became clear to me that in order to fulfill my intention to establish a training monastery, I would have to take full ordination myself. And in order to take full ordination, I would have to leave the lineage that I had been part of for so many years. It meant basically potentially losing everything. It's a difficult path because it is a revival of something that was established by the Buddha and has been absent in the Theravada tradition for almost 1,000 years.
If women want to take full advantage of what the Buddha has made available, it's simply, Bhikkhuni ordination is the answer.
We are now seeing the re-emergence of the full and proper place for female mendicants within the holy sasana of the Buddha. It's been a long, long wait. The impenetrable wall of opposition submerged their history, eclipsed records of their wisdom and teachings, and made invisible their lives. In short, this wall of resistance attempts to control the full and radical nature of the Buddha's true inheritance.
The moral arc of our present age moves towards social justice, towards such values as reciprocity, mutual respect, and appreciation of diversity. This includes a call for the contribution of feminine voices, for Buddhism to unfold its potential it has to be nourished by feminine perspectives, especially on social justice and care for the natural environment. The values we need to tackle these problems resonate well with principles at the heart of the Dharma, and these are also values that are well expressed by the feminine point of view.
The women of the Dharma now carry the banner of the Dharma into the 21st century. We bow to your perseverance and dedication, to the depth of wisdom and love that brought us this day, and to the gifts that you as women carry for us, for the world, for the future of the Dharma. Thank you.
After taking ordination, there was this sense of finally coming into a more full alignment with the Buddha's intention.
Now we don't belong to any lineage other than the ancient lineage of the Bhikkhunis, which has been founded by the Buddha himself. And we don't anymore belong to any particular lineage of a master who is contemporary or who has maybe just lived in the last century. So we are basically on our own now in that sense. And that brings up lots of feelings of inconfidence sometimes, but at the same time, it is exactly what I wanted to become aware of my feminine conditioning. And I'd like to use this opportunity to rise up and meet it and transform it.
Aloka Vihara is the house in San Francisco where the nuns live and where they welcome visitors.
So we need to really bring the right attitude to our practice and see it as, the Buddha is pointing to a way of freedom, a way of deep, true happiness. The Buddha is pointing us to the deep happiness that we find in our own hearts, regardless of the conditions around us. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa.
Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi.
Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi.
Dhammang saranang gacchāmi.
Dhammam saranang gacchāmi.
I would like to ordain, to take full ordination. At the moment I'm a novice. My main duties would be helping the senior nuns in basically running the monastery. When I came, I was very moved by seeing the nuns being able to perform a leadership role in a monastery, and just a way of holding the hierarchy that seemed to me far more skillful.
I've been doing the practice for about 35 years. I help the nuns, particularly in things that their rules don't allow them to do, and also help cooking, receive donations. It's such a wonderful way to live. Everybody having a clear intention of being honest and being generous and being kind.
There isn't this divisiveness between monastics and lay people. It's completely symbiotic. The monastics can't live their everyday life without the community support, and the community comes here because they can't receive the type of Dhamma teachings anywhere else.
It's really helpful for me to kind of have the ayahs here for me to put out all these questions to them and to see what their thoughts are. And some of my experiences they've been through.
This community is special to me because of the sisters. The women I've dealt with in my life tend to have more of a heart sense. This is the piece that, really needs to be addressed.
They fill in a very important niche in the Buddhist community. Right now, my Sangha is headed by monks, male monastics, which is wonderful. But when I hear Dhamma talks from Bhikkhunis, they complement the Dhamma, some of the Dhamma teachings. So with the male teaching and the female teachings, I feel that it's just an entire wholeness that makes the Dhamma completely understandable and heartfelt.
So there is this relationship of interdependence between the lay community and the monastic community, where without the support of the lay community we wouldn't exist as monastics. We can only live in places where we're supported, where there is an interest in the Dharma, and people want to support the monastic Sangha. And in return we share whatever we can of our practice and insights that arise through our practice, and also in making a space for people to come to.
It gives a certain feeling that one is part of a bigger whole.
So in order for the nuns community to grow and flourish, it can only happen with the support of the lay community.
Greetings to your husband.
So I envision a monastery where women can come and train as nuns. It wouldn't be only a monastic community, but a place where also lay women and lay men can come and benefit from the sacred environment that develops when people live together and practice together.
We would like to move into a rural setting. I hope, that this style of living can provide a way to live in harmony and live close to nature and basically listen to nature, what she has to say.
We have community beach cleanups on a regular basis. And as we do this, we keep in mind not only making it clean, but protecting the birds and the creatures in the sea, in the ocean. Each time we pick up plastic, it's, may this benefit the birds, may this benefit the fish, may this be a source of safety to the creatures of the ocean. We want to offer the example of simplicity and renunciation as a model that people can live by. Not that everyone has to shave their head and give up everything, but to know that you can still have joy in your life without having a lot of things, and that generosity and compassion can be a much greater wealth. Anagarika Maria took seminary ordination at Aloka Vihara on September the 29th, 2012. She's now called Sister Jayati. This is very uplifting for us, as it marks the first of the new generation of nuns in our community, supported by Saranaloka Foundation.
The dream of moving to a rural setting came to fruition in May 2014. The property was originally rented by the Aloka Foundation, the steward organization of Aloka Vihara. The following January of 2015, the property was bought by the Aloka Foundation. In the year following the purchase, donations have come in from around the world, which has helped pay down the loan and make improvements on the house and property. Just 2 years after its creation, Aloka Vihara Forest Monastery is poised to be a training ground for the next generation of Bhikkhunis and a place where the Four-fold Sangha can practice together. During the first year in residence, the sisters made it a priority to create space for both men and women lay practitioners to come and stay and practice together. At the present time, they are involved in creating a plan for the reconfiguring of the nuns' quarters to accommodate new women who are requesting training. It's a good problem. So far, the support for the community has been heartwarming and consistent and demonstrates a strong desire on the part of the Sangha in the West to support the development of this sacred space and create equity in the monastic Sangha, just as the Buddha envisioned. If you're in the area of Placerville, California, you're welcome to go visit the Sangha whenever the nuns are in residence. Here is a timeline of some Bhikkhuni ordinations from 1988 to the present. If you look at the first line as the first generation, these are the Bhikkhunis who can now ordain others. The second line gives a history of other ordinations, some of which we did not talk about in this presentation because of space restrictions. But note the first ordination at Aloka Vihara that took place in 2014. Seminary Jayati became the third Aloka Vihara nun in 2014. Aloka Vihara Forest Monastery has been used in this presentation as an example of a group of women who are working hard to revive and revitalize the Bhikkhuni lineage. But Aloka Vihara is not alone. According to the Alliance for Bhikkhunis, there are Theravada women monastics in all of these countries: Australia, Cambodia, Canada, Czech Republic, Germany, Hong Kong, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Nepal, New Zealand, Sri Lanka, Taiwan, Thailand, the United States, and Vietnam. The Alliance for Bhikkhunis is an international organization that supports the development of the Bhikkhuni lineage by redistributing donations in the area of healthcare, ordination support, education, and many other areas of need to Bhikkhunis throughout the world. This picture was taken at the first ordination at the Aloka Vihara Forest Monastery in 2014, the Four-fold Sangha in action. Note how the Sri Lankan bhikkhus are walking side by side with the Bhikkhunis, reinstating this vision of gender equity through action. With the reestablishment of the Bhikkhuni Sangha, the Buddha's vision of the Four-fold Sangha is firmly standing on four legs again. Bows of gratitude to the Alliance for Bhikkhunis for the original PowerPoint, and to Aya Tataloka for her support and ability to fill in all the details, and to Jill Schubert, a local in Placerville, for waving her magic wand and making this presentation beautiful and fun. There are many more stories that need to be told, but for now, one more image of Mahapajapati from the Insight Meditation Center in Redwood City, California. We started our story with Mahapajapati starting the Bhikkhuni lineage in the time of the Buddha, and came back full circle to the reinstatement and revitalization of the Bhikkhuni lineage in modern times. Thanks so much for your attention. If you would like to support Aloka Vihara Forest Monastery or the Alliance for Bhikkhunis in any way, contact information for both follows on the next slide.